I was born white in a black family in America, now they accepted me. My grandmother spent 29 years introducing me as my son's little mistake at every single family gathering she ever hosted. Every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every cookout, always with a small laugh, always loud enough for at least 6 people to hear. I stopped correcting her when I was 11, because by then I'd learned that correcting Odessa Carter in front of an audience never went the way you hoped. 3 months ago, I walked into her 75th birthday dinner with a manila folder tucked inside my purse. It had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 6 weeks because I hadn't decided yet whether the truth inside it was worth what it might break. By the time the cake came out, my grandmother wasn't laughing anymore. And what was in that folder didn't just clear my name. It cleared a piece of her own family's history she had spent 50 years trying to bury. Welcome back to Porch Light Stories, where the families are real, the wounds are old, and the truth eventually finds a seat at the table whether anyone saved it won or not. If you've ever been the one who didn't quite match the family photo, stay with me, this one's for you. And if stories like this mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it helps more than you'd think. My name is Simone Carter. I'm 34, and I'm a genetic counselor at a regional medical center outside Atlanta, which means I spend my working life explaining to frightened families exactly why a child inherited what they inherited. Recessive genes, dominant genes, the quiet math written into a body before it's ever born. I chose that career at 19, in a night class at a community college, staring at a Punnett square on a projector screen until it made me cry in a room full of strangers who assumed the material was just hard. It wasn't hard. It was personal. I'd been trying to solve that particular equation since I was old enough to notice I didn't look like anyone else at my own dinner table. My fiancé, Theo, a hospital pharmacist with more patients than any one man needs, has heard the little mistake line exactly once from my mouth, and has never once asked me to explain my own face to him. I mention him now because by the end of the story, that detail matters more than it seems to. I was born on a Tuesday in April at Piney Bluff Regional, the same hospital where my father, Cornell Carter, and my mother, Denise, had both been born 26 years earlier. My father is a deep, warm brown, the color of good pecan wood. My mother is a shade lighter, more like strong tea with the cream stirred halfway in. I came out pale as a bedsheet, with a head of loose, light brown curls and eyes that would settle into a green-gray by 6 months old. The nurse, my mother told me once, years later, in a voice with no laughter in it at all, checked my hospital wristband twice before she'd hand me over. My father held me first. In 34 years, he has told me exactly one thing about that moment. He said, "You had my ears." That was the whole story he ever needed. It was not the story the rest of Piney Bluff needed. By kindergarten, at Mount Carmel Baptist Sunday School, I understood, in the wordless way small children understand things, that I made grown-ups uncomfortable in a particular way, not cruel exactly, but curious in a way that had teeth in it. My own grandmother started it, and she never really stopped. Odessa Carter was, and still is, a deaconess at Mount Carmel, a woman who ran the Sunday dinner program, the usher board, and most of her 6 children's marriages with the same firm, unbothered hand. She kept what she called the grandbaby's wall, a stretch of hallway outside her kitchen lined with school photos of every grandchild going back 3 decades. My cousin Renee's gap-toothed second-grade photo was up there. My brother Marcus's photo from the year he lost his first tooth was up there. Mine went up a full year late, and only after my mother, quietly, without raising her voice, brought a framed copy over herself and hung it on a nail she'd carried in her own purse. The world outside our family found ways to ask the same question. At a school field day when I was 7, a substitute teacher stopped my mother at the gate and asked her, not unkindly but not gently either, to confirm which child was hers, then asked to see some identification before she'd let me leave with her. My mother produced her driver's license from her wallet without a word, waited while the woman compared the photo to her face, and then walked me to the car so calmly I didn't understand until years later how much that calm had cost her. By middle school, kids at my own school had their own version of the question, dressed up as an insult. A boy named Deshaun told me in the cafeteria that I wasn't really black, like it was something he'd looked up and confirmed. A girl named Tasha, my closest friend since 3rd grade, once asked me, gently, If I ever wished I'd been born into a different family, one that matched. I didn't have an answer for her then. I'm not sure I fully have one now, except that the family I was born into is the only one I've ever wanted, whether or not it wanted all of me back. At 8, at a 4th of July cookout, my Aunt Pam, my father's older sister, looked across the yard at me chasing my cousins with a water gun and said to another woman I didn't know, loud enough for me to hear over the radio, "Now you tell me how that happened." She wasn't asking a question. She was performing one. At 10, at a different cookout, a great aunt visiting from Alabama asked my mother, right in front of me, whether my real daddy knew I existed. My mother didn't yell. She never yelled. She set down the pitcher of tea she was holding, looked the woman dead in the eye, and said, "Say that again, and you can find yourself another ride back to Alabama." Nobody said it again that day. But it got said other places, other years, softer, sideways, dressed up as jokes. My father loved me. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else, because this isn't a story about a man who didn't love his daughter. It's a story about a man who loved his daughter and his mother and his own standing at Mount Carmel in roughly equal measure, and who spent most of my childhood trying to keep those three things from colliding in the same room. When Aunt Pam made her comments, he'd go quiet and change the subject to football. When my grandmother left my photo off the wall, he told my mother, "Let it go, Denise. It's not worth the argument." He never once told me I wasn't his. He also never once, in 18 years under her roof rules, told his own mother to stop. My mother did both of those things constantly, and it cost her. Odessa stopped inviting my mother to the church women's retreat the year I turned 9. Nobody ever said why out loud. Nobody had to. The worst of it landed the summer I turned 16, at the Carter family reunion, held that year at a state park 2 hours outside Piney Bluff, a rented pavilion, 140 relatives in matching yellow t-shirts somebody's cousin had ordered off an Etsy shop for $18 each, and a printed program with a schedule of events for the whole weekend. Every grandchild old enough to walk had a line in that program. A poem, a solo in the Saturday gospel set, a seat at the head table for the banquet. My name wasn't on the program at all. When I asked my father why, he told me my grandmother had simply run out of room. There were 40 blank lines left on that program. I counted them twice that weekend, sitting alone at a picnic table while my cousins rehearsed a song nobody had asked me to learn. That was the year I started keeping a folder of my own, a plain green file folder I hid in the bottom of a keepsake tin under my bed. I didn't call it anything dramatic. I just started keeping things. The reunion program with the 40 blank lines, a photocopy of my own birth certificate, which I went to the county records office and requested myself at 17, half hoping it would say something different than what my parents had always told me. It didn't. Cornell Carter. Denise Carter. Nothing but a nurse's handwriting and a hospital seal. I kept it anyway. I think even then I already knew I was going to need proof of something someday, and I wanted to be the one holding it. I left Piney Bluff for college at 22, later than most, because I'd spent 4 years after high school working the register at a pharmacy to save money my parents didn't have to spare on top of my brother's tuition. I chose the state university 2 hours south, the farthest school that accepted me, and I landed on biology almost by accident because the course catalog listed a class called Human Heredity and something in me needed to sit in that room. My professor, Dr. Alvarez, a small, exacting woman who graded genetics quizzes like she was auditing a bank, once wrote on my exam, "You ask better questions than most of my grad students." I didn't tell her why. I don't think she'd have believed the real answer was a hallway in Piney Bluff and a wall of photographs with a gap in it. I'd actually bought a mail-in ancestry kit once already, during my sophomore year, and let it sit sealed in a dorm room drawer for 8 months before I finally threw it away unopened. I wasn't ready yet to know the answer on someone else's schedule. I wanted to be the one to go looking, when I was ready, and not a moment before. I finished my degree in 3 years by overloading every semester, then went straight into a genetic counseling program in Atlanta, the rare degree that sits at the exact intersection of biology and grief, because most of the families I'd eventually counsel weren't there for good news. I did my clinical rotations in a pediatric hospital, sat across from parents holding lab results that would rearrange the rest of their lives, and learned the specific stillness a room takes on right before you tell someone the truth about their own child's body. I was good at it. I was good at it because I'd had 22 years of practice sitting still while people studied my face for an explanation I didn't know them. By 29, I was a senior genetic counselor running a caseload that included prenatal counseling, hereditary cancer risk, and increasingly complicated ancestry and inheritance cases other counselors handed off to me because, in my supervisor's words, I had a patience for family stuff that most people burn out on by year 3. I bought a small brick house with a paid-off used Honda in the driveway. I got engaged to Theo. I did not go back to Piney Bluff except for my grandfather's funeral, 4 years after I'd left, where Odessa hugged me at the graveside, said, "Look how well you turned out," and never once said sorry for a single year of the 22 before it. The call came on a Tuesday in March, from Aunt Pam, a woman who had not called me directly in 11 years. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. "Grandma's been having dizzy spells since January," she said. "They did a scan in February. Found cysts on both kidneys, more than they expect for her age. The specialist in Macon used some phrase I didn't understand. Autosomal dominant, hereditary, family history. And I need you to help us understand what they're actually asking us, Simone. You do this for a living. They're asking about her people. Her mama's side, her daddy's side, all the way back. I want to tell you I felt nothing but professional obligation in that moment. I didn't. I felt something old and complicated crack open in my chest, the exact feeling I used to get counting blank lines on a reunion program. But I also knew precisely what those doctors needed, because knowing that is my actual job. Polycystic kidney disease runs in families along a specific, traceable pattern, and if Odessa had it, her children and grandchildren needed to understand their own risk. This wasn't a request for money. It wasn't even really a request for me, Simone, the granddaughter. It was a request for what I knew, which, for the first time in my life, my family needed more urgently than they'd ever needed my presence at a single reunion. I spent the next 6 weeks doing 2 things at once. Professionally, I built a family pedigree chart for Odessa's specialist, calling relatives I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, asking careful, clinical questions about kidney stones, high blood pressure, strokes before 60. Personally, on my own kitchen table at night, I finally did the thing I'd circled for 15 years without landing on. I sent in a new ancestry kit, and I hired a genealogist named Curtis Boone, a retired archivist who specialized in Georgia County records going back to Reconstruction, because a DNA percentage on its own was never going to be enough for what I actually needed. I needed a name. I needed a person. Curtis called me on a Sunday night, 11 weeks before Odessa's birthday, with a document he'd pulled from a probate file in a county courthouse 40 minutes from Piney Bluff. A white tenant farmer named Elias Whitfield had fathered a child in 1889 with a woman named Cassandra, formerly enslaved on a plantation 2 counties over, freed at 19, working as a laundress by the time that child, a daughter, named Odessa, my own grandmother's namesake, was born. Cassandra's daughter, the first Odessa, had hair the 1910 census enumerator himself described in his own handwriting as light, and eyes he recorded as gray. That first Odessa was my grandmother's own great-grandmother. It's a piece of history a lot of black families across the South carry quietly in their own family Bibles, whether they've ever gone looking for the paperwork or not. The complicated, often unchosen origins written into some branch of nearly every family tree from that era. Stories some families choose to speak about openly at reunions, and others choose to fold up small and put away in a drawer, the way Odessa had folded hers away for nearly a century. The gray eyes had resurfaced twice more across 5 generations, both times in children the family had briefly, quietly whispered about before the trait went dormant again and reappeared in me. The gene had never actually left the family. It had simply been waiting for the right 2 copies to line up in the same body twice in 135 years. My grandmother's own bloodline had made me exactly what she'd spent 29 years insisting I couldn't possibly be. If you've ever had to prove something about yourself that should never have needed proving in the first place, you already know where this is headed. Stick with me, because the dinner where I finally laid this on the table did not go the way anyone in that room expected, including me, and if you want to see how it lands, go ahead and tap subscribe now before you forget. My friend Angela, a fellow counselor I'd worked beside for 6 years and the one person outside my own family who knew the whole history, told me flatly, over coffee in the break room, not to go. "Simone, you spent your whole adult life keeping your family at arm's length for good reason," she said. "You don't owe them closure just because they finally need something from you." She wasn't wrong. I told her I wasn't going for them. I was going to find out, once and for all, whether 3 months of dizzy spells and one scared phone call from Aunt Pam had actually changed anything, or whether it was just the same old song with new words. I wanted an answer either way, even if the answer turned out to be that nothing had changed at all. There was another reason, too, one I didn't say out loud to Angela, because I wasn't sure how to say it without sounding like the 11-year-old who used to sit alone at a picnic table counting blank lines. I missed my grandmother. Not the version who called me a mistake in front of strangers. The other one, the one who taught me to shell butter beans on her back porch the summer I was 6, who hummed old hymns under her breath while she did it, off-key in a way that used to make me laugh, so hard I dropped the beans in my lap. That grandmother hadn't shown up at a single holiday in years either. But some nights, stirring a pot on my own stove, I still caught myself humming the same 3 notes. I set one rule for myself and wrote it on a sticky note I pressed to my dashboard the morning of the dinner. Share what the doctors need, say what needs saying if the moment comes, and if it doesn't come, leave before the cake and let it go for good. That sticky note was still stuck to my dashboard 3 hours later in the Fellowship Hall parking lot, while I sat with the engine off, reading it one more time before I made myself go inside. I printed the full report the week before Odessa's birthday. Curtis's letter, the census excerpt, a clean, plain language summary I'd written the way I write for frightened families every single week, translating chromosomes into sentences a grieving person can actually hold in their hands. I put it all into a plain manila folder, the same kind I'd used since I was 16, and told myself 3 different reasons for bringing it. To help the specialist, to help my cousins understand their own risk, to finally, quietly put the whole little mistake business to rest. I didn't fully admit the 4th reason, the real one, until I was already parked in Odessa's driveway. I wanted her to know, not the doctors, not my cousins, her. Odessa's 75th birthday dinner was held in Mount Carmel's Fellowship Hall because by March she was tired more often than not, and the family had decided, without asking me, that a proper to-do would do her good. 40-some relatives, tables draped in white paper over folding legs, a sheet cake from the Piney Bluff Bakery with her name, spelled correctly for once. My father hugged me at the door like no time had passed, which is its own kind of wound, the ease with which some people can simply set 11 years down like a coat on a rack. My mother squeezed my hand once, hard, the same old signal I'd learned to read as a child. I see you. Stay steady. Aunt Pam thanked me for the pedigree chart in a voice that nearly cracked, then, 20 minutes later, told a cousin within my hearing that she'd always known there was something different about me, in a tone that made the word different do a great deal of quiet, careful work. Odessa was seated at the head table in a wheelchair she was still pretending not to need full time, dressed sharp as ever in royal blue, her hair freshly pressed. She called me over before the food was even set out, took both my hands in hers, thinner now than I remembered, and said, in front of a dozen people arranging chafing dishes, "Look at my son's little mistake, all grown up and still coming around." A few people laughed, out of habit more than cruelty, the way a room laughs at a joke it's heard so many times it stopped hearing the actual words. I didn't laugh. I also didn't correct her, not yet. I said, "Happy birthday, Grandma," found my seat, and set my purse, with the folder inside it, on the chair beside me. It felt heavier in my hands than a few sheets of paper had any right to be. Dinner went the way Carter family dinners always went. Fried chicken and mac, and cheese passed hand to hand down long tables. A baby 2 seats over started fussing during the blessing, and somebody's toddler dropped a full plate of potato salad on the floor, and for a second the whole room laughed at something ordinary and easy, the way families do in between the harder moments. My cousin Renee, the one relative who texted me every single birthday for 11 straight years without ever once getting a reply worth the effort, sat next to me, squeezed my arm, and said, "I'm glad you came," plainly, without an agenda, which I'd genuinely forgotten some people were still capable of. My brother Marcus made a toast to Odessa that named every grandchild in the room except me, an omission so old and so familiar it barely registered as a fresh cut anymore, just an old scar catching the light again. Aunt Pam, 3 glasses of sweet tea in, and emboldened by them, leaned across the table during dessert and said, "You know, Simone, seeing as you're the medical one now, maybe you can finally explain to everybody how exactly you turned out looking the way you do. We've wondered a long time." She smiled when she said it. She always smiled when she said things like that. The room went quiet, the specific quiet of 40 people pretending to focus very hard on their cake. My father's jaw tightened. My mother set down her fork. Odessa, at the head of the table, actually looked pleased, the way she always had whenever the subject surfaced in public, as though watching me squirm under a question I couldn't answer had, for 29 years, been its own small, private birthday gift to her. I reached into my purse. "Actually," I said, "I can explain it." I pulled out the folder and set it on the white paper tablecloth right beside Odessa's sheet cake and opened it to the first page, the plain summary I'd written for exactly this kind of room. "This is a pedigree analysis I put together for Grandma's kidney specialist. While I was building it, I found something else. I want to share it because it belongs to all of us, not just me." I walked them through it the way I walk every family through hard news, slowly, in plain words, nothing they'd have to ask me to repeat. A tenant farmer named Elias Whitfield, a freedwoman named Cassandra, a daughter named Odessa, born in 1889, with hair a census taker himself had described as light and eyes he called gray. I watched my grandmother's face while I said the name Odessa out loud, her own name, her own great-grandmother's name, in that fellowship hall for the first time in probably 50 years, and I watched something in her go very still. "The trait's been in the Carter line for 5 generations, I said. "It skipped most of you completely. It showed up fully in me, because both my parents happened to be carrying a copy, one from each side, going all the way back to the same great-great-great-grandmother sitting right there in your family Bible, Grandma, on the page you show me yourself." I slid a photocopy of that Bible page across the table, the same page Odessa had shown me proudly once when I was young enough that she still occasionally forgot to be careful around me. "I'm not your son's mistake," I said. "I'm your family's oldest secret," finally showing back up at the right time. Nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only 5 or 6 seconds, the kind of silence that does more work in a room than any amount of shouting ever could. Aunt Pam's mouth opened and then closed again with nothing in it. Marcus reached for the folder and read the summary page twice, his lips moving slightly the way they used to when we were kids doing homework at the same kitchen table. My father put his hand flat on the tablecloth, not on the folder, just near it, like he needed something solid to hold on to. Odessa didn't cry, not right away. She looked at the photocopy of her own family Bible page for a long time, her thumb moving slowly over a name, Cassandra, that I don't think she'd said out loud since her own mother died. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes weren't hard anymore. They looked something closer to frightened. "You're saying this came from my side," she said. Not really a question. A woman doing math she'd avoided her whole life. "Both sides, probably," I said, gently, because I'd meant to be gentle with this part even before I knew how the room would take it. "But yes, yours, going back 5 generations. It was never a question about my mother's faithfulness, Grandma. It never was. It was just genetics, waiting for the right 2 people to have a baby, the same as it's always waited, in every family, including this one." Odessa's hand was shaking slightly when she reached for mine, the same hands that had held mine at the door 20 minutes earlier while calling me a mistake in front of a room full of people arranging chafing dishes. 29 years, she said, quiet now, quiet in a way I had genuinely never heard from her before. I told everybody 29 years. She wasn't finishing the sentence. I didn't finish it for her. "I know," I said. "I kept count, too. I let that sit exactly as long as it needed to. Then I said the only thing I'd actually come there to say, the thing I'd rehearsed in my car in the church parking lot before I ever walked in. I'm going to keep helping with your care, Grandma. I already gave the specialist everything he needs, and I'll keep doing that, because that's not something I'd ever hold back, whatever's happened between us. But I want to be clear about something else, too. I'm not looking for an apology at this table, in front of everybody, the same way the mistake comments always came in front of everybody. If you want to say something to me, you can say it to me, just me, another time. Tonight, I only wanted you to know the truth. What you do with it is yours. I didn't storm out. There was nothing left to storm out of. I ate a slice of Odessa's cake, yellow with lemon icing, the same recipe the Piney Bluff Bakery had used for every Carter birthday since before I was born. I let Renee cry into my shoulder a little. I hugged my father at the door on my way out, and this time it felt like slightly less of a lie than it had 2 hours earlier. My mother walked me to my car and didn't say much, just squeezed my hand once more, the same old signal, and said, "You did that the way I always hoped you would." I drove the 2 hours home with the empty folder on the passenger seat, and for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, the quiet in that car wasn't bracing for anything. It was just quiet. Odessa called me herself 6 days later, on a Thursday afternoon between patients, and asked, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her, if I would come by her house alone sometime. No dinner, no relatives, just to talk. I went the following Sunday. She had the family Bible already open on her kitchen table, the page with Cassandra's name on it, underlined in pencil sometime in the 6 days since her birthday. She apologized. Not a performance for a room this time. Just the two of us, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she never drank from, telling me she'd spent her whole life terrified of exactly the kind of whispering she'd aimed at me for 29 years, and that fear had made her cruel in a way she said she'd never once let herself examine, not until a manila folder made her look straight at her own great-great-grandmother's name. I don't know that I've fully forgiven her. I've told her that, too, in the same plain voice I use for everything else. Forgiveness, for me, is turning out to be less like a door swinging open and more like a slow, careful renovation you do room by room, checking the foundation as you go. Her surgery is scheduled for the fall, and I'll be there, in the waiting room and in the paperwork, because that's the kind of family member I've decided I want to be, regardless of what kind of family member she managed to be for 29 years. Aunt Pam has never apologized, not once, though she has quietly stopped making the comments, which in my family sometimes has to count as its own small kind of progress. Renee and I talk every week now. Marcus asked, a little awkwardly, if he could take me to lunch sometime, just the two of us, and I said yes, because some bridges are worth rebuilding slowly, plank by plank, even when the person on the other end can't quite look you in the eye while they're doing it. Theo and I got married in October, in the backyard of the brick house I bought at 29, and Odessa sat in the front row in a wheelchair somebody had decorated with real ribbon and asked, before the ceremony started, if she could be the one to add my wedding photo to the wall in her hallway herself. She hung it with her own hands the following week, right in the middle, no gap around it, no year-long wait. I didn't ask her to. I don't think, 29 years ago, either of us would have believed we'd get here. I spent 29 years being told I didn't have the right blood to belong at my own family's table. It turned out I had exactly the right blood, going back 5 generations, hiding in plain sight in a Bible my grandmother had shown me herself. What I don't have anymore is the need for anyone's permission to believe it. Some people only look closely at the truth once the truth becomes medically necessary. That doesn't make the truth any less true, and it doesn't make the years you spent proving it any less real. If someone spent decades treating you like the family accident, and the facts eventually proved you'd been theirs all along, would you call that belonging, finally arrived, or would you call it something else entirely? I'd genuinely like to know where you draw that line. Tell me in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, share it with somebody who's ever had to prove they belonged in their own family. I'll see you in the next one.